We're gonna start the civil society panel. Thank you all for joining us again. When we were working on putting together this event, in a very similar way to what we constantly heard today, the important thing for Einat and for me was to put our own knowledge and experiences and our more theoretical knowledge and experiences aside and approach civil society organizations that work in Israel with multiple levels of conflicts, not necessarily within the Israeli-Palestinian national conflict, and ask for their input about their work and about what they're doing and about the constructions of institutional justice and injustices that they work with. So today, as we're listening and talking about those levels in the more theoretical level, we're very happy to think about our previous conversations. Unfortunately, the time is limited and we're not able to bring all of the organizations that we consulted with before, but we truly hope that this collaboration is just the beginning of a very long process and that we will get to hear everyone in the future. Another thing I wanted to mention is that in one of my previous conversations with Chris Dolan, he asked, why are we doing an event like this when there's no obvious transitional justice process in Israel? And it was a very important question, and we got into prolonged conversation about it. And one of my responses is that transitional justice does happen in Israel. Maybe it's not called transitional justice, but various organizations do all kind of work, projects, modeling of work that promotes different voices and practices of justice. And this is what I hope that we're able to hear right now and kind of build on this in order to further our work in promoting a better or more just or more dignifying reality for all of us. So with us in this roundtable sits attorney Netta Loevy and Dr. Nida Shoughry from the organization Itach in Hebrew and in Arabic. I am with you. It's an organization of lawyers for social justice. Nida and Netta are co-directing and co-leading of the Itach project to the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Also with us, Yaara Benger Alaluf, who is the education and community coordinator for the organization Zochrot. Zochrot in Hebrew, remember, in feminine, so women who remember. It's an organization who promotes acknowledgement of the Palestinian Nakba and the Palestinian rights of return, especially among the Israeli Jewish public in Israel. And of course, the long time feminist activist Hamutal Gouri, the founder of Consult for Good, a storyteller for social change in the personal, communal, and political levels, and a member of Mothers Against Violence. So we will start in this order. And each one of you give us a little introduction about your understanding of how institutional justice oftentimes interrupt just realities and the ways that you as organization try to overcome that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tal. Thank you, Einat, and thank you all for coming back from lunch and listening to that. I'll start by apologizing that I will need to leave in the middle of the panel, and I'm very sorry about that. So, as Tal mentioned, we are from Itach Ma'aki, Women Lawyers for Social Justice. Einat was one of the establishers of this NGO 21 years ago. And I think that in the name and in the essence of our organization is some of the things that we were talking about before lunch. We are lawyers, not all of us are lawyers, but we are working within the legal system. We are using legal tools. We are working most of the time with the existing tools. However, we see, to refer to what Fionnuala said, to the cracks, many cracks in the existing tools. We're trying to change them with advocacy and through legislation, etc. And maybe most important actions we do is to try and create new tools that are outside the regular toolkit. And I think that we will, both me and Nida will try to touch upon some of the injustices and some of the examples of models that we're trying to build, not all of them. But I want to start. While I was sitting here, I remembered that I was standing in front of this podium a few years ago when I just started my position in Itach Ma'aki in the project of 1325, just in a nutshell, UN Security Council resolution that from 2000, that according to which all member states are obliged to both participation of women in decision-making bodies in the issues of peace and security, prevention of protection of women from all sorts of violence, prevention of conflicts through gender perspective and implementation of gender perspective in the discourse of peace and security. And I was just starting my position there. The project of 1325 in Itach Ma'aki has been started many years before that. But we were just kind of celebrating a success. We were just the government just adopted a resolution that followed a very huge campaign that we did. And we were trying to celebrate and acknowledging the cracks. And I was standing there a bit puzzled by my new position. And I was talking about our vision to do bottom-up and top-down work. And I remember my hand gestures. And I remember I think that for many years we were and we're still looking for what does it mean? I mean, what does it mean? How do you do this? How do you do in practice this both practices? And I think that, again, in the first lecture, Fionnuala referred to the criticism on 1325, which is we work from this criticism. I mean, we see this 1325 UN Security Council resolution as a tool that is flawed, that many countries and many states are using for their own, how did she say,
washing.
Yes, all sorts of washing. And we are aware of all of these problems and criticism. We agree with this criticism, but we're trying to reclaim it, to reclaim the principles. And one of the things that we've been doing, Nida will elaborate about that later, one of the things that we've been doing in the last two and a half years was to start, I don't know if to start over, but to start a new collaboration of Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel, feminist organizations and activists, working together to understand, first of all, to talk about the wounds that 1325 caused within the feminist community in Israel, and to work together together to see how and what can we do together. If we can do together, what letters can we sign together? What letters we do not sign anymore? What letters and petitions are we leading, and what do we stand behind, and what do we petition against? And one of the issues that we will elaborate about later, that one of the things that we did was to take the focus from the participation and representation pillar of 1325 to the protection and prevention pillars, and namely the talking about what does it mean, what is the effect, the implications of the occupation on women. And 2 years ago we did we wrote a position paper about the women of Sheikh Jarrah to focus on them and on their rights and the implications on them. We are now going to publish a paper about Mesafriata and the women of Mesafriata, but this Nida will elaborate about. I want to add something else to your first question about the injustices and the gaps that we have between existing laws and the lack of implementation of existing laws. It is considered to be as if Israel has quite progressive laws in the issues of gender equality, and that they are not implemented or well enough implemented. However, this is also only part of the picture. These laws that do not include equality in the broader sense of the word, and the outcome, and this is one of the reasons. It's not by accident that, for example, the law that kind of adopted part of 1325 is not implemented. It's not implemented because it's policy, and it's because the essence of 1325 cannot be translated into real action by the governments of Israel. We have an example from last year. We were invited to participate in a governmental process of writing a national action plan. We decided to do a collaborative work with Jewish and Palestinian feminist organization within Israel, and together we went to the government, and together we said our criticism, our input, and they listened. And we came to many of their meetings, and they even agreed to come to our meetings, the ministerial leading women of this process. But at the end, the outcome, it totally erased, and there was totally ignored what we said, even as testimonials, even as index, just to say what, the issues that the women raised there, and it was totally ignored. Yes, so
Did you ask them why?
Yes, we asked them why.
Did they answer why?
Not formally. We are still waiting for the formal answer. But it was 200 pages that were not published. They published 16 pages that had some recommendations. Some of them are not that bad for advancing women's rights in Israel, yes? But still, it lacked the whole picture. Of course, it totally lacked the issue of women, peace and security. Why political? It's too political. I think this was the... Okay, so I just wanted to add two more points of good models and best practice that we are trying to adopt to our work. And one is something that is a project that we are not working on in Itach Ma'aki, but our partner Dana Miltenbaum is leading it in Itach Ma'aki. This is called City for All in feminine tense, and she's working with cities to implement and adopt gendered strategy, but she's doing it in a manner of collaborative, long and in-depth process that includes dialogue both with the municipalities and with women's organizations and civil society organizations and community and just residents of the cities. And this mechanism, this new mechanism is a model that I think is one of the ideas, in my opinion, of a good or best practice model that is still needs to be developed, etc. But again, is one of our models. And another way that we are acting is to bring the full story in details of each woman that we represent. For example, in labor, in issues of labor rights, that we represent women in courts. So first of all, there are kind of mechanisms that try to give an option of compromise and mediation, and this causes, in fact, severe implications on women, usually, and especially on women from deprived communities. And when we approach and when we represent women in courts, we not only write the full story of this woman with all of her social background, but we demand from the court to focus on that and to at least relate to that and not ignore the socio-economic background and political background. And one last thing. For many years, I've been leading 1325 projects, the 1325 project alone in Itach Ma'aki. And it is a very big project, very complex, very political, very delicate project. I had a steering committee of great members and great partners, Palestinian and Jewish members. But only a year ago, we were able to at last make it a project that is being run by Jewish and Palestinian directors. And I had the great privilege of having Nida joining me. I finished actually, so I finished earlier, and the outcomes of this model of running this project together, I can feel it in my personal life, and of course in the outcomes of our projects. One of our projects, which we have here, two of the participants in our training that we're leading now, a project of training for women to negotiation in gender perspective, and one of the outcomes, I believe, was the outreach of our call for participants. After we published the call for participants, we had more than 300 applications, very varied, very diverse, and this was a great surprise for us. And I think that this is one of the maybe best practice, I think, that we can show or illustrate from our side. Mm-hmm. And
thank you. So I have 5 minutes?
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, I have 5 minutes.
Oh my God. So I
right
took your time.
As always.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that is it. Okay, so thank you all. I will try to make it brief and touch upon the important or vital points to this session. First, I want to say that I'm not a lawyer. I didn't join Itach Ma'aki because I'm a lawyer or because I believe in the legal system in Israel and that I believe in legal tools. I'm not. Why did I? We will see. And part of it is this idea of, making tiny steps or tiny changes. And it also connects to my role both as a victim of the Israeli occupation and conflict, but also my role as someone who wants to change the reality, okay? So if you have a dead end, what do? Do you stay in the corner as a victim or do you do something else? So I've decided the latter. So it's better to do even baby steps, tiny steps rather than doing nothing. And when I actually, applied for Itach Ma'aki, again, not a lawyer, nothing, and even my focus up until then was not gender also. But my understanding of a feminist perspective is justice and equality. And with this perspective, I go. So I entered into the interview room and I said, hi, this is me. I bring my entire package, my personal package. Personal is political, and, as it turns out, that's a feminist role, right? So I said, that's me. Here what I have to offer to you. But in return, I want to interview you. I want to see that if you're the right place for me to be at. I don't want to waste my time, not because I have capabilities and abilities that I would love to invest in a place that will result or end up with some kind of an outcome. The match has been great. The partnership that I have with Netta is great, and not only because this is not like an Israeli, Jewish, Palestinian. No, it's not. It's just like we're two sides that become a whole, and it's not necessarily that I represent the and I never represent anything but myself, even try. And Netta is the same. It's all about open conversation. We have open conversations about everything. There's no taboo. It's not your usual Israeli-Palestinian partnership or work. And I think that's what makes it work. And that what makes it, so if I'm really convinced that, we have to tackle this issue, we have to publish, or we have to speak in such a language, I try to convince Netta and, vice versa. And I do my best to. So either I go with her position or my position, or, most of the time we meet and we have similar ideas. So that's one thing in terms of the model. And I don't think you can lead a 1325 project, especially in Israel, without having a Palestinian voice, perspective, and insider. So it's very important to have that, and it's very important. It also makes a difference who's sitting there. Okay, who's your partner? Am I really bringing? So we have. I will share with you briefly again. I'm really good with this. Netta and I have a WhatsApp group. Okay, it's called Fun. And in there, I just insert, she's also supposed to do that, but she's not. I insert all kinds of testimonies from women who are affected by the Israeli-Palestinian occupation, the conflict and the occupation, okay? And it's really overwhelming, because I have to be exposed to all of these stories and testimonies and everything, and it's tiring, okay? But not many people would do that maybe. I was like, yeah, why bother? I want to have my weekends. I want to disconnect from the news. But again, I feel that I'm here on a mission, okay? There's a purpose why I'm here. So that's one thing. In terms of how it's affecting our work, and I have to say that it's not only because I'm there, but in Itach Maki, we're trying to make partnerships with, as diverse a population and actors as possible. So for example, the position paper that we wrote on Msafer Yatta, and I urge everyone, we will send you the information to join this appeal to stop the eviction and the transfer of population there. We do it also with partnership with Nabila Spagnoli from Tufula. And so you have there a number of actors and bodies that are working to bring really the real reality and just mirror it on paper, okay? So, and when we started working on the position paper, we thought, okay, so what? We don't want numbers. We don't want that, yeah, and this year this happened. We don't want history, or we want to have the real voices of women and how is that affecting them. And I'm not going to cover everything, but maybe for once we're talking about something that's, how does it feel to live in fear? The status of fear. How does it affect your life? How does it affect your psychological system? How does it affect you in terms of your ability to progress, live, or even function on a daily basis? That's one thing, for example. Another thing that we tackled is the idea of dreams and hopes and prospects. Can you dream? Do you have a prospect when you live in such a reality, for example? So I'm just giving you a teaser so you read the whole thing. So these are the kinds of issues that we tackled in the position paper. We tried to really, tackle issues that are not usually covered. And final thing that you have there, which we kind of thought, maybe it's not a good thing to bring. But we did tackle domestic violence and violence from partners. And we thought, maybe that's not good because it will maybe feed or like reinforce the stereotypes about violent Arab or Palestinian women, but it's there, okay, because it has to be there. And if we want to bring the whole picture, then we have to bring the variety of voices and the diversity of everything, and bring also the pain and the feelings and give them legitimacy. So thank you. Was I good?
Just go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Einat, thank you, Tal, thank you, everyone. I will also try to be precise and short, but I do want to start with, I'm improvising, but I want to try to rehearse something that maybe in alternative realities should work. We gathered this morning here to talk about transitional justice, and I wanted to imagine how it would be like if we started this day saying, we gathered here today on the lands of the Palestinian neighborhood of Talbieh. The street Jabotinsky was called Shoughry Amir Abdallah until 1948, and until before May 1948, all of the inhabitants of this neighborhood became refugees. All their property was expropriated and looted, and all of them are prevented from returning here. They and their children are not allowed to even come visit or go to their ancestors' graves. And me, myself, and my family immigrated here on the expense of these people. And this acknowledgement is something that is done in other places where transitional justice processes are being held, and I don't know, just wanted to see how it feels if we try that. So I'm...
Thank you.
I don't know who to thank, but I hope we can at someday stop doing, maybe start doing that, and at someday when the refugees return to even stop. So I work at the organization called the Zochrot, which, as Ta said, works for the goal of promoting acknowledgement and accountability for the Palestinian Nakba. It has been working since 2002, so we're celebrating 20 years of not being able to end the... yeah, but we're very dedicated. Arin was a very good preface to what I'm going to talk about our organization, but I will maybe repeat, but try to unfold some concepts that were just thrown to the air. Also as a practice of saying the details of the atrocities. So the meaning of the word Nakba in Arabic is a great disaster or catastrophe, and in our context it refers to the ongoing process of expropriation of the Palestinian people by Zionist forces and the State of Israel later. The organization Zochrot was established by Jewish Israelis 20 years ago, which means following the collapse of the Oslo Accords and the beginning of the Intifada. Exactly in the time when many people were losing faith in any kind of peaceful solution, the founders of Zochrot believed that the root of the sources of this dead end are that we're actually not acknowledging neither the historical roots of the problem nor the legitimate aspirations of the people that we're negotiating with. And I think in the 2000s, I don't have numbers, but I think that most Israelis, I know about myself, were not familiar with the word Nakba or with the details, and they never thought about the colonial roots of the Zionist movement or learned about the war crimes which their and my country was established. So our organization was established by people who were educated within the Zionist system and paradigm, and they chose to reject the silencing efforts and to take responsibility, and in order to create a just future. So in terms of what is the injustice that we deal with, so most broadly speaking, we're talking about settler colonialism. And it's still important to stress, and I want to stress, that the problem is not with migration nor with Jewish ethnic or national life, but with a framework of settler colonialism that is a deliberate will to take inhabited space and gradually change or shift the balance between the settler population and the indigenous population in favor of the settlers through the different mechanisms of dispossession and the deportation. So the Nakba as a process started, in fact, before 1948, which is also something that we usually forget. The Zionist movement deliberately aspired to acquire as much land as possible for only Jewish use. And in fact, we know of at least 57 villages that were depopulated and destroyed. Destroyed. Thank you. Before December 1947. So we're talking about since the beginning of the Zionist settlement in the land. And the war itself it's a peak in a long process, in which, besides the horrors of the war, which include massacres and rape and looting, we're talking about the destruction of, as Arin said earlier, the destruction of over 500 villages and the displacement of over 750,000 people. And just to understand the magnitude, we're talking about over 85% of the Arab residents in the land that became the State of Israel. And already in June 1948, so the war is still going on, and Israel cemented the Palestinians' refugee status with the decision to not allow the refugees to return to their homes, in a decision that contradicts, but even contradicted back then, the international law. So rather than a historical event, we're talking about a process that continues also today, first and mostly by the prevention of the return of the refugees, but also maybe most acknowledged through the continuation of the oppression today by the fragmentation of the Palestinian people, which you presented very nicely, of like one people that now has different legal statuses, and it can be the same family, and some are under siege in Gaza, and some are refugees in Lebanon, and some are internally displaced people, etc. And of course, systematic confiscation of land, use of military force, administrative detentions, etc., etc. And if you mentioned Masafriyata, so I will also say that even the direct displacement of Palestinians didn't stop when the war stopped, but continued in the 50s, in 67, and continues today. Very briefly, I will just, I cannot talk about everything, but some very quick links between the Nakba and gender. So one possible effect that we can talk about is the deurbanization that you also mentioned. So the most violent depopulation was of the cities, and the cities like Jaffa, Haifa, Ramle, Alid, Beersheba. Over 90% of the Palestinian inhabitants of the cities became refugees, and even the few thousands who stayed in the cities and were put in a ghetto, many of them were not originally from the city, but refugees from nearby villages who were looking for refuge. So the big cities, which had rich economic and cultural life, where women enjoyed increasing freedom and agency during the British period, cities that had public spaces and political movements and feminist associations and leisure clubs, etc., these cities disappeared, and the Palestinian society at large went through a process of deurbanization, which women were and still are the main victims of. Of course, we can also talk about effects to masculinity, not only refugees, but also Palestinians who remained within the borders of the newly established state. They lost everything overnight, like women, yeah? But families were torn apart, they lost their homes, and all the physical and social environment changed. And this national crisis was in many ways experienced by men as a crisis of masculinity. So feelings of failure and shame on the one hand, and systemic racism, discrimination, and neglect by the state of Israel on the other hand, all these created growing feelings of despair and impotence, which led to many men also going down the path of addiction to drugs and alcohol. I will also say that, and this also relates to the previous talk, that of course the colonial and oriental sources of Zionist also affect gendered or have gendered effects on Jewish Israeli women and men, and we do understand that in order to change the Israeli society towards justice, we also need to change, not only the colonial, but also gender, ethnic, and class relations within the Israeli Jewish society. And that's one of the reasons why the founders of Zochrot chose the plural female form of remembering as a way of challenging the patriarchal militaristic kind of memory that still prevails here. So referring to our mechanisms of redress, with much input and work by Jessica Nevon, who is also here, Zochrot in a way proposes to work within the framework of pre-transitional justice as a set of tools and strategies applied during an ongoing conflict, with the main goal of promoting a transition from a culture of denial and impunity to one of recognition, responsibility, and accountability. So in terms of truth-seeking, we conduct research on the Zionist ideology, on the colonial mechanisms, about the war itself, about the depopulated villages, the refugees, and other settings of transitional justice and decolonial processes. All the existing and new knowledge that we gather is made accessible to the public in English, Arabic, and Hebrew in our database, as well as in our app called I Return, which allows users to navigate to depopulated Palestinian villages and learn about their histories before 48 and the faith of their residents. So we also have guided tours to these villages, courses, workshops, public events, and direct actions that make present the Palestinian Nakba. A while ago, Zochrot also held truth commissions in which Palestinians could tell their stories, but also Jewish Israelis who fought in the army could testify about crimes they committed. Now, after the truth-seeking part, we still need the accountability and the redress, which I think that Zochrot has achieved remarkable success in bringing the Nakba in the public discourse, but maybe not, or less so broad recognition or acceptance of the responsibility, and also not an understanding of the continuity of the Nakba as something that is still going on. So our work actually goes, or we try to bring the society, even those who accepted the historical facts, from empathy to responsibility. and to create a society willing to think in terms of decolonization and redress. Of course, our central audience is the Jewish Israeli society in Israel, and this derives from its moral and practical responsibility for the Palestinian refugeehood and its privileged position in the current regime and power structure. Specifically in the Palestinian case, the most clear answer to, or the process of decolonization and dismantling the supremacist regime imply the implementation of the right of return of the refugees according to international law. And therefore, we also conduct research together with Palestinian organizations about voluntarily return around the world, about its feasibility in this land. And with each Jewish Israelis about return, about plans that have been done that will not mean displacement or violence against Jews, but try to find a solution that doesn't involve further harm. Maybe one last thing in terms of, let's say, informal transitional justice mechanisms. We also try as much as possible to challenge the hegemonic education system by offering alternative curricula for teachers who do want to engage with these issues but don't have the tools. We offer transitional justice training for educators and also personal pedagogical guidance for teachers. And in recent years, we've been also addressing the human rights and civil society movements and organizations, trying to, as Michal suggested in the previous panel, to also decolonize these organizations. So just for example, we're now working on a joint research group together with Physicians for Human Rights Israel on the effects of the Nakba on health. Actually, until last year, Physicians for Human Rights never talked about 48. They never went beyond 1967. And actually, there is not enough information. So we need to create, this is knowledge that needs to be created, and this cooperation is meant to do so as a way of decolonizing also the practice of civil society organizations.
Wow, so thank you, Tal and Einat, and thank each and every one of you are still here. Like, woo!
Survivors.
I'm here in my activist hat as a member of Mothers Against Violence. But as I told Tal, I also really want to introduce and speak from my identity as a storyteller for social and political change. So I will start by telling you a little bit about Mothers Against Violence. It is an informal group. We're not registered as a nonprofit. We started out as a spontaneous group of women, more or less around my age, so 60, in Balfour in the demonstrations. It started out really informally. Each of us brought our yellow vests from home, and our purpose was to protect the demonstrators, particularly the young ones, from police violence. And then when we started, the first messages I was getting were from my friends, Ethiopian Jewish women, who were actually the first women activists to start an organization of mothers protecting their children from police violence and brutality. And they said, so the white asses of your kids, of your privileged kids, are now at risk with police brutality, and you're awakened. And it was a really important comment, I think. And so we continued to go to Balfour and to other places, but we also started supporting their protests especially against the fact that policemen who killed Ethiopian youth were never brought to justice, or if they were brought to justice, they didn't serve time, and this is in the case when there was an active investigation. The second group we partner with was Mothers for Life, which was a group of bereaved mothers, Palestinian bereaved mothers, whose family members were killed in firearm violence within Arab communities in Israel, and we marched together with them in al-Fahim, etc. And again, I think that it was a journey of understanding that sometimes privileged communities are awakened to injustice or lack of justice when it knocks on their doors. And then Balfour ended for a time, and there was a change government established. And we said, well, we are going to continue to be mothers against the violence of the occupation. So I want to dwell a little about the mothers component, because I want to say our group is open to mothers or to those who believe that motherhood or parenthood is part of their identity, regardless of their gender or their personal status and biological. So it's not about having children. It's not about having your own children. The concept is that motherhood is a moral and political position. It is a position of caring deeply, not only for our personal children or the children in our family, but for all children and for the planet they inhabit. And I think that the conversation here today around masculinity, and actually vulnerable masculinity, but I think that living, and I say this as a Jewish Israeli woman, living in such a highly militarized society, caring deeply is not held in such high regard, right? So in the stock market of qualities that are nechshavot, that are considered of value, caring deeply is not one of them. And so that's why I see caring deeply as a political form of, as a political action and as a form of resistance. And so members of our group we have honorary mothers who are male, right? And of course, it's open as long as we sort of identify with the idea that motherhood is about caring, and about caring to transform the world. And so after Balfour, and when the change government was established, a few months, just maybe 2 months later, there was a pogrom performed by Jewish settlers on the village of Mufakra in Misafir. And we went out on a mission with other human rights organizations, and we insisted that we wanted to meet with the mothers. And we sat down with the mothers and the children, and we asked them, how can we help? And they said, please tell our story. Do not let our stories be forgotten. We came back several weeks later, and we've been having regular missions to the villages in Misafir, including one coming up next week. And to go back to the really interesting conversation between Chris and, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, about immediate assistance. So we do bring warm clothes and dry food and school supplies, etc., because this is what the women of Misafir are asking us to bring. We bring what they need us to bring. But it really isn't it certainly isn't only about humanitarian or immediate relief aid. It is about, you need to have some basic needs in order to activate your agency. So when they told us, please do not let our stories be forgotten, I had tears in my eyes because because I'm a wimp, but no, because I care deeply, and because as a storyteller, I believe change happens when silence is broken. And this is something that is extremely personal to me, but also extremely political to me. Now, there's an amazing book by feminist folklore researcher Maria Tatar. She's amazing. Reading her books was a transformative experience for me. And she wrote this amazing book called The Heroine with 1,001 Faces, which was a belated but an extremely appropriate response to a very famous book by Joseph Campbell, The 1,000 Faces of the Hero, which had 1,000 faces but not a single heroine. And what she did was to research who is the female protagonist of myth and folk and fairy tales. And she said, so female protagonists are curious, they care deeply, and they're committed to social justice. And I was reading this on the train on my Kindle, and I had tears in my eyes, and I had to stop, and I said, she wrote this book just for me. Does it ever happen to you that you're reading a book and you're saying, someone wrote this book for me? Because what she's saying is she's depicting the profile of a feminist intersectional activist, right? That it's about justice and equality, not just for women, for everyone. And so in her book, let me just read one short excerpt. She said the women protagonists, they escape domestic abuse and violence through storytelling, rarely wielding the sword and often deprived of the pen. Women have relied on the domestic crafts and their verbal analogs, spinning tales, weaving plots, and telling yarns to make things right. Not just getting even, but also securing social justice. So storytelling is so key to what we do at Mothers Against Violence, but Jessica, I hope you'll talk about what you're doing, and Zochrot, this is all about what you're doing. And I love the fun WhatsApp group? Yeah. With testimonies of...
It was very hard to listen and to hear and to read testimonies,
So storytelling is really key, and which brings me, I want to really briefly touch upon the question of victims and the role of victims. So last year, for the first time, I taught a storytelling course for adults, both men and women, who are survivors of extreme violence in their childhood. And it was called Experts by Lived Experiences. And the purpose of the training was for these people to then talk to policymakers and educators and law enforcement agencies and provide expert knowledge on the prevention, rehabilitation of violence against children and against adults. So the idea was, by providing them sort of a toolkit of storytelling, that they'll be able to tell their own story. And the interesting thing was that when I did individual mentoring with them, and I asked them, why do you want to tell your story? Because telling a story of violence endured is often reliving the violence. And they said, because I want to be seen and heard, because being seen and heard is part of my healing, and because I don't want others to suffer. And so victims, and I'm looking at you, victims are never only victims. They're activists, they're experts, they're storytellers, and they're the fairy godmothers and the guardian angels of other people. And maybe the last thing, I have the privilege of now doing a storytelling program with the Israeli-Palestinian Bereaved Family Circle. And again, these are people who lost their most precious loved ones to violence, to conflict. And yet, they found the capacity to sort of pull themselves by the roots of their hairs to a position where they're seeking justice, peace, and reconciliation. And so I have to say that having the privilege of working with these people, men and women, of such dignity and nobility, I guess is why I remain the nudnik optimist that I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of these, for these three beautiful presentations. Jessica wanted to share some of the work of the tribunal. If you can do it in a very brief way, just to comment on
I am very moved for this event, because in a way it merged all my life and all my passions. And for the last 35 years, I have been dealing with gender issues, even before we have in Hebrew the word gender, migdar, that we are looking and searching. And at the same time with issues of the occupation and the colonization and discovering the Nakba and the layers of silence. And it also relates to my Argentinian origin. Now people are celebrating around the world the big Cup World, the Mundial, and in '78, in the middle of the Argentinian dictatorship, Argentina won, and I was still there, and we went to the streets to celebrate. And only many years after it was exposed that under the city there were the centers of detention and torture, and people were made disappears and kids were taken. And it's all these layers of not knowing and silencing. And from all this journey, I thinking about more than 20 years, I opened with a group of women, most of us survivors, of this, we call it the Tribunal on Gender Crimes. In English, it's easier. In Hebrew, it's complicated. I change the name every week. And Tviot, Tzedek, Lebgiot, Migdariot, and we call it also Truth Commission, because it's a merging of all the truth commissions I research, and the Russell Tribunal in '66, and the Japan Tribunal in 2000. And so at some point we say we are tired of giving training to all the physicians and the social workers and the policemen to say how to be sensitive and not to blame victims. And we say, okay, we don't wait. So we have this hashtag, lo mechakot. We just open an alternative platform, and we try to make it different. And maybe at some point, some of our things we do different as an alternative space will be mainstream in some way. But at some point we say, and I think it's also relevant of the work of Zochrot, is at some point we do it outside the system and try to see if we can change, in a way, pushing the change when the crimes are still ongoing. Thank you.
Before I open to questions, we suggested that some other of the organization that we had conversation with would present, like Jessica, and I wonder if Yael, you would want to say something?
Thank you. I actually haven't prepared anything, but I just want to thank you for these inspiring conversations today. And I'm very grateful that it's only the first symposium of several. I've been thinking personally a lot lately about the issue of transitional justice, because in Women Wage Peace, and I have had this conversation during during lunch, we're not focused on transitional justice or even transitional processes in Women Wage Peace. We are focused on bringing the leaders from both sides to sit down and negotiate and reach an honorable and non-violent, mutually accepted solution with the active participation of women throughout all the process of negotiations, pre-negotiations. And we don't talk about what's going to happen afterwards. And we rarely, I mean, of course, we now have a partnership with the Palestinian Women's Movement, a new one. It was founded in July 2021, the Women of the Sun. But we are not talking about these issues of transitional justice and TRCs and so forth. So we know, we listen to the narratives, we know the stories. Each time we meet with our Palestinian partners, we begin our meeting by listening to each other about what's going on, and the situation, the current situation is really harsh. But this is not something that we focus on in Women Wage Peace, and personally, again, I was beginning to think about it lately, and trying to imagine what we're going to do the day after the agreement, because it will take a year or 5 years or 10 years. Negotiations will begin, okay, and the agreement will be reached. And hopefully, and and I like Hamutal. I'm an optimist by nature and by ideology. I'm an optimist feminist, but I think that we do need to pay more attention on these issues, because we know from other cases around the world, from the Northern Ireland case, from the Liberian case, that the day after the agreement, it's not like we're going to rest and go on vacation. We will need to work very, very hard to implement the agreement, to make sure it sustains, to make sure it holds. And for this, we will need these kinds of processes of thinking. So again, we're not doing it in Women Wage Peace currently, but this is something that I think I will, of course, talk about it with everyone in Women Wage Peace, to think and see how and if we can promote this thinking in Women Wage Peace, perhaps, of course, with the cooperation and collaboration with other organizations, that this is their focus. So this is, and again, thank you for, I mean, the wheels in my head are spinning as I speak and as I listen to the marvelous presentations today. And I'm looking forward to continue this cooperation. So thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll open for questions. Try to keep the questions short so the answers will be long and detailed.
Anybody else? So first of all, thank you. I think your projects are inspiring, and the work that you're all doing is just magnificent and so important. I actually want to refer to you the question that I raised in the previous panel of what price is paid by the fact that women's organizations are centering on imahot neged alimut, on Zochrot, on using the gendered vocabulary as opposed to, for example, talking about care of violence or talking about violence separable from feminism in a sense, and I think that this is important, particularly because when we open up the discourse into the various gendered other perspectives, we also saw in the previous conversation that this discourse can be abusive in a sense, or restricting other voices to be heard. And of course, we all in this room, I guess, know the origins of why we used feminist, language in the past, because caring was something that is very much associated with women, and fighting against violence and the way we see violence, something that was very much associated with women. But I'm wondering whether we're in a stage today or in the future where we can just put our values on the table, saying these are our values, disconnected from the feminist angle that we put into it, in a sense. And I think that putting these values on the table in a more clear way will, again, open up room for more groups to be involved in the discourse. And it might also, I'm just thinking, it might also, open up other opportunities of cooperations and actions and activism to occur. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Really interesting, and I didn't know much. I didn't know mothers. I know the other organizations, but starting from you, I think what you just said proved that representation is really important. So while it doesn't do the whole job, or not even half of the job or something, but it is important to, in a way, to move forward for other things. So maybe, although we מזלזלים בזה, what? Undermining it, maybe it's more important that we actually acknowledge. And I, in a way, responding to you, and I think this is all the organizations, and I know your organization as well, nobody's waiting, right? So we're not waiting for someone to do something. And in a way, so we need to think how we're bringing the transition, right? This is what you are doing, how we are bringing this transition, and thinking like more focused on the political transition that needs to be. What do we imagine the political transitions that we want to happen, and then understand what needs to take place. So acknowledgement and truth is one thing, but we heard that socioeconomic issues are the fundamental of many conflicts, and what victims are looking for. So maybe not looking only into the truth of victims here, but also to remedy the socioeconomic things that are still going on, and maybe we can do that while the conflict is still raging. Maybe we don't need to wait for something that will happen somewhere, sometime.
First of all, many thanks to the panel and to the conference in general, which is very stimulating and important. I'm a retiree of the Department of Psychology here at the Hebrew University. My interest is in political violence, particularly towards children. Not too long ago, we held a conference here under the sponsorship of the Minerva Center for Human Rights. Einat, Alba, and Danny were very, very cooperative, so thank you again for that. I think there are two issues here that I would like to just bring up. One is the whole concept of what's called gendering transitional justice, or we have there's gendering political violence. When one thinks about what that means, it usually means essentially paying attention to the women's side of it, to the female side of it, which I think is very important. There's no question, we don't have to go into historical analysis of how women were discriminated against and undervalued and suffered essentially at the hands of men. No question. On the other hand, there's been tremendous progress for women in the last 100 years. If you consider that only 100 years ago in Switzerland, women didn't have the right to vote in Switzerland. Now there is a great deal of progress. At the same time, I think that if one takes Professor Dolan's lecture seriously, men are also victims. And if you look at the statistics of who is killed in war, who is injured in war, it's many, many times more men than women. On the other hand, and here I go to some of our own research, which is consonant with others, women psychologically appear to suffer more under violence, even though they may be exposed less to violence than men. We're doing more and more research. This also interacts with age. This is true of children, adolescents. Women suffer a great deal. So men and women have different needs and experience violence differently. Therefore, transitional justice should take that into account. And I think that I would suggest that we have to get to a point where we are not paying attention mainly to a person's gender or a person's ethnic group or a person's background of one kind or another, but to what the problems are. There are diseases and disorders that are more characteristic of women than men. They deserve to have that expense, whatever the expense, to have that problem solved. If there are disorders related to men, they should have those problems solved. I think that this has to be more related to both genders. I noticed that a sociological phenomenon in this room.
Can you help us and phrase it as a question?
Pardon me?
Can you help us and phrase it as a question?
Yes. Shouldn't we pay attention in gendering, because gender means both genders, pay attention to the needs of men and women in transitional justice? That's one thing. And I think that the notion of gendering has had to do a lot with, if we look around the room, I'm proud to say that I'm the only member of the audience of the male gender. I'll probably the only one, I'm not good at guessing people's ages, probably the only one over the age of 50. So from that point of view, I'm proud to be here, and I'm glad of that. The other aspect of this that I would like to ask is, shouldn't we pay attention?
Really have to allow some time for answers, because
here's the question. Shouldn't we pay attention to the effects of authoritarian regimes, including the effect of Israel is in many ways an authoritarian regime, on both genders, and not blame the other gender in something like heterosexual or homosexual systems? Shouldn't we blame the people who are actually doing the harm?
Thank you. Sorry for the... No worries. I think you joined us recently, right?
I've been here since 12.
Yeah, okay. So there are some pieces of the puzzles that you missed, but maybe some of our previous speakers can at the end. Yes.
I heard Professor Dolan's lecture.
Okay.
And essentially that's one of the things that stimulated me to...
Wonderful. Okay, so I'll open it for you guys.
I just want to say briefly to your question, yes, of course. I think Carol Gilligan put it really beautifully. I think it was in Joining the Resistance, or maybe in another voice, that she said, in another voice, that she said, under patriarchy, caring is a feminine practice. Under democracy, and she meant a robust, not a formal, to go back to your point about authoritarian regimes, caring is a human practice. So yes, absolutely, as feminists, as people, we should care about everyone who are oppressed by oppressive systems. I just want to say real briefly that one of our current projects at Mothers Against Violence is the Yellow Ribbon Campaign, which is calling to bring back male and female soldiers from the occupied territories. And another project we're doing is that we are reading testimonies of mothers of soldiers, because according to recent research, 1 of 16 soldiers in active duty in the occupied Palestinian territories suffers from post-traumatic disorder after. I actually think it's more, but the research showed that at least one in 16. And so, yes, oppressors can be sometimes victims of the oppression. And yes, as feminists, as people, we should care about the victims of oppression and free everyone from the role of oppressor or predator, and of course from the place of victimhood.
I want to maybe refer to 2 points. One that, can you hear me, right? Yeah. One that, Limor, you asked about representation. Maybe it's important. Of course it is, okay? But it's only one of many pillars, and in 1325, it's one of 4 pillars. But I just want to widen up a little bit the way you see me. I'm not here because of representation, okay? I'm here because of also, you know, you have protection, for example, okay? The fact that I'm here, physically here, is not something that should be taken for granted. I was a victim of, you know, I was part of a very difficult case of reunification law that, you know, easily I would have been leaving this place, moving to another place, and physically not being on this land, okay? If I didn't fight hard enough for over 6 years to, you know, to be here and unite with my husband, who's not Palestinian, by the way, he's Egyptian. You know, someone explains to me how the law applies to him, but it's just because, you know, it's part of, you know, the prevention, the protection. So it's not about representation. Having a Palestinian reaching to a certain place is not because, you know, Jewish or Israeli institutions opened up their doors and hearts for and welcomed, you know, a diversity, or it's not that. We have to, and we still fight very hard to make it to this position. As I'm sure Irene has her own story. Each one of us, be it male or female, has their own story of how hard we worked. Many people come to me as like, where's your English for? Like, where's that English? I worked hard for that. You know, it's not, I worked hard. I don't have someone who spoke English or I didn't go to private schools. I worked very hard to get to that level. And because I knew this is a tool that I must, I'm one of the privileged with all the you know, the bad experiences that I had to go through, starting from, you know, getting education, being unemployed for so many years, you know, having the right to decide who to fall in love with and who to marry, you know, basic human rights. I had to fight through many of these. So that's one thing. So it's not only about representation, that's for sure. You've asked about expanding maybe and not just limiting the discourse or the action to women, okay? And, you know, we're not excluding anyone. Feminism does not exclude. As I said, I'm not a feminist. I'm not a feminist by definition. My understanding of feminism is something more inclusive, okay? But it's like, yeah, but it's, no, I'm just saying that it's like asking, for example, workers not to have a workers' union because, you know, they can unite under civil rights, I don't know what, you know, but like there's an importance for us bringing this voice as women who've been affected over the course of many years and decades in all like geographical areas. Like women are always victims or survivors of some kind of a conflict. So there's importance to us coming here and saying, okay, we have a perspective. We are the expert. I love what you've said. You've said experts by experience.
Lived experience.
Yes, so we are the experts, okay? We live this, you know. So that's one thing. Maybe I will leave the rest to you. Sorry.
Just referring to the same question, Zochrot is not focused on women, and it's not only like not all the workers are women or identify in any way. I do agree that the name Zochrot is problematic, but exactly or precisely because of the values and not because of the gender question. And I mean, it's a brand at this point, but we also have issues with the fact that remembering is not enough, and we do much more than that. But I do, just as a curiosity, the name was coined by a member of Zochrot who is a transgender person who was also the first Jewish person to speak publicly in the return march of the Palestinian IDPs. That happens each May 15th, and I think that I really want to see that as a movie. Like it's the pride that we don't have. Like who knows that that the first Jewish person to appear in the return march was openly transgender. Everybody in the march knew about it. Curious fact.
Right.
Yeah.
This should be made into.
And I also want to say, like, what you mentioned about workers, etc.
Not to criticize this, but I just want to say that within the audience you would see people laughing, cynical, you know. I just don't want to remind.
No, I'm sure, but
and
it
take
happened.
Responsibility.
I just wanted to say that, like, it's another conference, but we should also ethnicize transitional justice, and it's also something that we've been working on in Zochrot within the Jewish Israeli society. Are Ashkenazi and Mizrahi people, do they hold the same kind of responsibility, etc.? So, like, there are more directions. And just briefly, the question of blame and responsibility. No one talked about blaming anyone. We were mainly talking about responsibility. And I recommend Google conversation between James Baldwin and Audre Lorde, in which he tells her, why are you still gendering this? I mean, men are also dying. Not only women are dying. And at some point she tells him, you still haven't come past blame. I'm not interested in blame. I'm interested in changing. And I think that's what we're doing today.
Well, I wanted to say a few words to conclude the conversation, but I think that Yaara just did it in the most perfect way.
I have t-shirts.
So I will just thank all of you for attending and sharing your knowledge and expertise and narratives with us, and looking forward to our continue this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.